Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from New York City, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast. I'm your host today, Kaustubha Das. Again, missing, suffering in separation from our co-host Raghunath Das, who's on the West Coast, running around like crazy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mara?
Yeah, he had a book signing and then a hardcore show last night, and he's got another same thing again today, book signing and hardcore show.
Okay.
So he's busy.
He's a busy man, but he's promoting his wonderful new book, From Punk to Monk, released by Mandala Publishers. And it's people are loving it.
Yeah, Mandala reached out to me actually to request if people could leave reviews on Amazon if they bought the book that way.
Please, everyone, if you have a book, go to Amazon, leave a nice review for Raghunath's book. It's just a great form. I just love to see real authentic teachings of bhakti being brought out in the popular culture. Most of the Eastern thought that's been brought out in popular culture is not the Bhakti Vedanta. You know, it's usually the impersonal or the non-personal ideas are presented, and it's great to see a book like this reach out into the popular culture that really, in an easy way to understand through a memoir, a fun read in one sense. But Raghunath's got great realizations, and so you learn a lot about the teachings of bhakti, and you learn a lot of his realizations of bhakti through that book. Yeah. So. Please go to Amazon, order a copy, and leave a nice review. More people can hear about it. What's happening with you, Mara? Everything good?
Everything's good. I got a couple announcements. We're back to recovery group meetings at 9:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we should mention there's no show tomorrow, but we'll be back on Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. with the spiritual scientist.
We're bringing the spiritual scientist back. We had a lot of great reactions from his appearances on the show last week. We'll bring him back on Tuesday. And then we got Raghunath back on Thursday, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. All right. So today is a Q&A day, but we're bringing on some special guests because we have a difficult question. And whenever we have difficult questions, we reach out to our friends and experts. So many of you are familiar with Dunya. We've had her on the show many times, as well as Kula Pradeep. I think Kula Pradeep we've had on the show one time. Is that right, Kula? Okay, is Kula unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay, let me give just a brief bio for both of you. You were saying? Were you about to say something?
I think it was.
Yeah, I remember having you on. It was right around New Year's time, and we had some interesting discussions. Yeah, 2 years back. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah.
But let me see. Kula Pradeep, he received his chaplaincy training at the University Hospital in Newark, New Jersey, with the Institute of Clinical Pastoral Training, the ICPT, in conjunction with the Spiritual Care Association, the SCA. And more recently, he has worked as a hospice care chaplain for the Visiting Nursing Association, otherwise known as the VNA. But now you're out in Stanford University, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And,
Very,
and
very different.
what's your role there in Stanford exactly?
I'm a chaplain also here, but higher education.
University chaplain.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say a little less stress, but maybe there's more stress on the campuses nowadays.
It's been very, actually
Challenging.
quite stressful. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're so happy to have you here. And Danya, she holds a master's degree in counselor education and holds a specialist degree in couples and family therapy. Her approach focuses on creative and spiritual wellness. She aims to help individuals and relationships thrive through deep spiritual practices at the core of the therapeutic experience. And it's her passion, in developing therapeutic tools that incorporate Bhakti principles and practices. Danya, thank you so much for coming with us today.
Happy to be here with you guys.
It was wonderful seeing you in India.
Yeah, that was
And now
great.
you're settled back down in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it looks like two mridungas back there, huh?
There's so many mridungas back here. There's three. There's three and a model, and my son wakes up first thing in the morning. He wakes up and he
Starts
goes,
practicing?
even though he's with me, and he goes, Papa, mridanga, kirtan. So we got to
Well,
keep him like ready to go.
Danya was, of course, born into a devotee family. And her father's, from what I hear, from what I understand, in Venezuela, he's like as famous as anyone. Like he's like a hugely popular musician. Is that correct?
Yeah, he is. He's known as the musician of Venezuela. Like that's
Okay.
his
What is his name?
Elan Chester. It's his
Okay.
performing name.
Yeah, yeah. And so, of course, you grew up with devotion and you grew up with music and you're a wonderful musician yourself. And then you went and married yourself into the Mayapuris, whose music we play at the end of every show for people that like love the music. All the time we get comments like, "What is that music at the end? Where can I find that?" So that's the Mayapuris. So a lot of mridanga in your life.
Yeah. Definitely.
Is it ever a little too much? Tell the truth.
You know what? It is only when I'm asked to play because I feel like I'm not as capable as I could be to like teach my son. So I feel like I need to like up my game. I feel like the not enoughness is my insufficiency, but
I'm sure you do enough for your son, and he's got plenty of good mridanga teachers all around.
That's true, yeah.
Okay. All right. So, we had a question that was sent in. This question was sent in from one of our Sage Group leaders, Bhaktivatsala, who's an old friend of mine. Back in my days as a brahmachari, as a monk, he and I spent a lot of time together, and very dear friend. Now he leads up one of our Sage groups, which are groups that you can join that if you want to go deeper into this, they meet once a week. They're small groups, usually like 7 or 8 people in a group. They get together every week, once a week, and for about an hour and a half or so, they just discuss. It's it's a place for sangha. It's a place for connecting with people. For if you listen to the podcast and you want to go deeper, it's a place where you can make some friends that are into this, a place where you can ask your questions, a place where you can present your doubts or your struggles. It's for sangha. And he shared this question that I'll read to you all, and listeners may be picking up already that I've brought 2 people in that have some counseling experience. And when I heard this question, I was like, I'm not the guy to answer this question. So I wanted to bring on our friends. So here we go. He writes, our Sage group is fortunate to have 2 wonderful members who are 2nd generation Bhakti yogis, as well as clinical psychologists. So 2nd generations means, just like we were speaking of Danya, that their parents practice Bhakti. In India, we wouldn't say, it would probably wouldn't be 2nd or 3rd. We don't know how many generations it goes back in many families that practice Bhakti. But since Bhakti was brought to the West in the 60s and the 70s, now there's a lot of 2nd and gradually 3rd generation devotees. So he's saying within his group, there are 2 people that were born into Bhakti yogi families that also practice clinical psychology. Within our discussions, the issue of mental health has come up. They have observed the propensity for devotees, for Bhakti yogis, to much more readily approach metaphysical solutions to relatively common, clear-cut mental health conditions, such as autism spectrum disorder, bipolar disorder, or clinical depression, rather than seeking allopathic Western medical help. Okay. And as we go through this, I wanted to clarify if I understand the question right. He's used the term here metaphysical solutions. I think it's something a bit broader than that, because it seems like as we read, he's indicating that people that have an interest in bhakti, that practice bhakti, devotees, that they are prone to more readily approach solutions that have to do with, in my mind, it's two categories. One is just having faith that the practice of bhakti itself will solve the mental disorder. Or two, approaches like Ayurveda, which are ancient, we would call them sciences, although many maybe modern day mental health professionals might not see them as valid. They might be entirely unfamiliar with them. So in any case, he's saying metaphysical, but it seems to me those are the categories. So he continues, during my time in the ashram, I can think of multiple examples where this has occurred, and the results have ranged between quite negative to catastrophic, not just in terms of the person's spiritual life, but also their mental health as well. So both suffered. Their spiritual life suffered, their mental health suffered, due to not approaching allopathic Western medical help. The intersection between mental health and devotional life is an interesting subject. There has been a bit of work done within the movement on this. I immediately think of Ravinder Sarup Prabhu and his Cure of Souls seminar series that was given some years ago, quite a few years ago. I think that was sometime in the early to mid 90s. That was a series of talks given on the work of Kulak Pradeep. Do you remember the name of the who that was, the writings that was based on?
Anton Boysen.
Anton Boysen, who was a Catholic priest.
He actually is the father of, modern clinical pastoral care chaplaincy.
I didn't know that. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the inspirations for me to go into chaplaincy.
Far out. Is that where the term dark night of the soul originated in his writings, or did he just write on that subject?
I think that's St. John. I think
Okay.
St. John of the Cross, right? I think was it?
Okay. But it's very fascinating talks about the mental crises that we might face on the spiritual path, and how they can either be springboards for rapid spiritual advancement, or how they can kind of be kind of insurmountable obstacles depending on how they're approached.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So he mentions that. He says other spiritual traditions have explored this as well. Multiple questions arise in my mind about this theme, but I'll try to limit it to one or two. So here are the questions. To what extent, and I think I'll just read them all, and then we can just start to approach them. To what extent are the Vedic metaphysical arts still alive and well in this age? And how much should we rely on them when getting a diagnosis or treatment for a suspected mental health condition? Is there quackery in this field? Okay. 2, at what point do we consider it spiritual bypassing to be looking first at metaphysical solutions to mental or physical health issues? We wouldn't rub a crystal to treat a broken leg. And although some mental health circumstances are subtle, some have clear-cut recognized physical or historical trauma causality, for which there are recognized treatments. Why have why have indeterminate, sometimes fuzzy metaphysical approaches become our first go-to for mental health issues? Do you think that mental health issues are more stigmatized within spiritual communities as opposed to mainstream society? It would be interesting to hear a devotee mental health professional's perspective on this. Okay, we have some here with us today. Has cynicism from materialists about spiritual practitioners being deluded or mad created a paranoia about mental health for those practicing spiritual life? What were Srila Prabhupada's instructions on this? I know that since he passed on, some instructions have been taken out of context and used to justify questionable practices. At the inception of the Bhakti movement in the West, even within mainstream society, attitudes and knowledge around mental health were still fairly regressive. To what extent have we clung to those outdated attitudes? And what are some of the current progressive success stories in this field? Thank you. So that wasn't 2 questions. That was quite a few questions, and it's a wide topic. Thank you again for your wonderful service, for having the courage and maturity to tackle complex reality of trying to understand the practical application of serious spiritual life in a fairly dystopian world. Okay, and so he shares some complimentary things here, but he says. He says, anyway, he says, you are the masters of contextualizing bhakti practices and philosophy, thank you, and making spiritual life not just relatable, but the obvious panacea for the conflict, catastrophe, and confusion of a society based on bodies. Okay, thank you so much. So why don't we start here? And maybe I can hear from both of you on the subject. Maybe we can begin with Kula Pradeep or Babu and then hear from Danya. But it seems to me like there's one basic fundamental question behind all these questions. And it speaks to, it could be categorized in different ways. You could say it speaks to one's faith or naivete, however you want to categorize it. But one could ask, we hear through the text on bhakti and the text on yoga, there's kind of like, you could say there are claims made in the sacred text that we read. In one sense, in a basic way, when we speak of Vedanta, there's the idea that our suffering in this world is due to our misidentification, right? Because I identify with the body, I'm an eternal spark of blissful spiritual energy by nature. And I am misidentifying with a body and a mind that are composed of material energy. And the nature of the material energy is that it's always shifting. So my steady happiness, which is my nature, becomes lost. I lose touch with it when I identify with that which is in constant change, going through constant cycles. So if we simply address that misidentification, then suffering subsides. We become free of suffering when we cease to identify with the body and the mind. And also when we get to like Bhakti Vedanta, still more is claimed, that through not identifying with the body and mind and identifying as the eternal loving servant of the root of all existence of Krishna, that not only do we become free from depression, anxiety, fear, but we also develop the deepest spiritual ecstasies. We become in touch with the deepest spiritual ecstasy, which is our own nature, through love. So if that's a fact, then shouldn't it be that just through these practices of bhakti, as they're prescribed by the great acharyas, by the great teachers in this tradition, should that not be enough to overcome whatever mental health issues that I have? If I seek answers to those mental health issues through modern forms of therapy, is it an indication that my faith is weak? Is it an admission that the process doesn't work? How do we view that? So I'm very curious to hear from people that are deep and long-time practitioners of bhakti, as well as people that work professionally in the field of mental health. So Kula, could we, and you know what, you don't have to answer the whole question, but let's just get the conversation started.
Yeah, it's a big question.
It is a big question.
I guess one thing that struck me from the question is that from my perspective as a hospital chaplain, that like being a chaplain in spiritual care in a hospital has kind of come, it's not like it's come a long way, but today's hospitals and the view of like care is like more holistic and multidisciplinary. And so they've required that there has to be a spiritual care department in hospitals. Well, there's something called the Joint Commission, which reviews all hospitals, and depending on what tier or what level of functionality, when the highest level requires that there's a chaplaincy department that represents all faiths.
I'm sorry, what was that organization, or
So it's called the Joint Commission. So when you're in
is
the
that like
hospital,
part of the American Medical Association or something like that?
it's an independent, like it's every hospital has to go through this. I don't know if it's federal, but it's the standardized quality assurance of hospitals.
Okay.
So they call that the Joint Commission. So every time I was in a hospital, like, okay, JACO's coming, and everybody has to, like there's some kind of regulatory department that makes sure that all hospitals meet these standards. They call that the Joint Commission.
Okay.
And so that's required, and the way that people look at medicine or look at health is including a spiritual care aspect to it. Now, that's in hospitals, and usually a lot of times in hospitals.
Before you go on, could I just ask, do you know exactly how long that's been a requirement? Like what year that was instituted?
I think I'd have to take a look. I don't know the
Roughly?
history. I'd say probably at least since I'd say probably at least the 90s as like a standardized way, a centralized way.
Mhm.
There may have been different independent kind of quality control or quality assurance things, but and maybe actually even before that, but I mean, it's regulation of hospitals, standardized,
Okay.
right? Standardizing for hospitals.
So even the Western mental health professionals are recognizing the need for
Yeah.
spiritual counseling
That's
as
right.
an answer to mental health issues.
Right.
It would be
Yeah.
incomplete without that.
Yeah, and I think that's also, it's not just something that, I think in our maybe in our spiritual communities, it was the opposite. The balance was like,
Yes.
we are a spiritual community. We're like, we needed to also mean maybe a joint commission to make sure that there was a little bit of a balance of services within our communities to make sure that there was also mental health and medical support, emotional support, even things like financial, family support, children, helping support for children and things like that.
Okay. So in other words, what's being brought up in the question is
Joint
that
Commission is founded in 1951. Sorry. Thank
okay.
you.
But the Joint Commission may have been founded then, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this requirement for spiritual care within hospitals
Right.
was established.
Yeah,
at that time.
that well, I can't say when it was, but I have looked up the requirement for spiritual care departments in hospitals with the Joint Commission, and it is in their standards requirement.
Okay.
For
So the question was observing something that, and by the way, I want to preface this by saying when we speak about, like, say, the Krishna consciousness movement, like the term movement was used there, so I assume that's that's what that was speaking to, or the broader bhakti global community. It's different in different places, and even in the same city, you'll have different communities, people that understand it and practice it with different attitudes. So in one sense, we can't just we have to be careful how we generalize here. But he was recognizing something real, that a tendency that he saw for people deep in the bhakti practice to, let's say, minimize, to perhaps even avoid more modern kind of approaches. And you're saying that perhaps there's two communities that are maturing simultaneously. That the modern the modern world of therapy is recognizing the need for spiritual counseling, and the spiritual community may be recognizing the practicality, the practical application of modern techniques.
Yeah.
Modern
Yeah.
therapy. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'd see that. Even in higher education, we're still doing advocacy for spiritual care programs, development of them for students. There is the thing is, the term spiritual bypass, it's true. It is a problematic occurrence when things that happen, but I think being careful to make sure that it just doesn't invalidate like spirituality, because that's what I was saying, coming from
Mhm.
from the hospital viewpoint, like it's almost like we were bypassed in a different way, like
Yes.
chaplaincy,
Material
spiritual care was
bypassing.
bypassed. Yeah, it was material bypass.
Yeah.
So that I think it's and also I think it's also important to note that, as it's not just because we're almost like the physicians of spiritual care, we would be the experts of that department. And so we think, of course, this is the most important thing. But I mean, but as a person who's practicing, like this is the most important, like a spiritual
Sure.
life is the most essential thing also. And so I think it's also understanding the context of where, that place in which is your community. You can't say like the hospital is, unless people are medical health or health professionals. This is, in some senses, your community. Most people are saying, no, that's just where I work, right?
Yeah.
But our spiritual community is like very essential for a very existential, important thing in our lives. It's the center of our lives. So to say like a spiritual bypass, it's not exactly, it can be, it can be helpful, can be harmful. It's just in the context that it's used.
Yeah.
If somebody says you're not your body and you're you're bleeding and well, you're not your body, well, you should go to the doctor,
Yeah.
this is obvious, but it
And
doesn't mean that
similar
you're not your
idea.
body isn't true in that, and that's you're not, that you're a spirit soul. It doesn't invalidate that.
So you're saying just as a devotee would address their bleeding body using modern techniques, similarly, mental health issues, they could apply modern techniques for mental health.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and Danya, just and maybe to focus even a little bit more tightly on this question, there are texts, bhakti texts, that describe what it means to surrender to God, what it means to give yourself fully to God. And those include statements like seeing God as your only shelter, and God, like there's kind of, they speak in a language that is very intentionally exclusive. I don't depend on anyone but you, dear God. I see that ultimately everything else is fallible but you. So coming from that end, as a bhakti practitioner, how do you view modern forms of therapy in the field of mental health?
Yeah, I think it's an important question because I think there's been a lot of maybe misapplication of that term surrender to mean that we can't take guidance or expertise from people who dedicate their lives and are quite surrendered themselves to helping in certain areas,
Okay.
And I think that maybe the fork in the road that we've come to historically, and maybe Kula, this has also been your experience, is the need for complementary training, where someone has a level of expertise that addresses certain material skills or material areas of knowledge, but they need to be complemented by spiritual culture, because otherwise it's actually incomplete. Not that spiritual culture is incomplete for spiritual things, but it is incomplete for medical things. I don't think that because you're a spiritualist, you're an expert in dental care.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how much surrender you have for Krishna, it doesn't make you any more expert in dentistry, for example.
Are
So
you
if I
sure
had
about
to,
that?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I should probably ask a few people about it, but that, Bali just had his 4 wisdom teeth taken out all at once.
He went to a
And
dentist, or he went to a devotee?
yeah, and so that's the question, right? This
Okay.
this devotee that put forth the question to you, he didn't just rub a crystal on it. And I don't,
Right.
I also don't think that that's maybe what devotees are suggesting. But I think that there is this, this concept of, what kind of what Kula was saying is we're not the body. And so that doesn't need to be our focus. And we need to do the minimum required to basically survive. And all of our other energy should be put to spiritual life. And if you see it kind of like a car that's like driving cross country, like you could be a driver and have that realization of like, I'm not this car. I'm not the car. I'm going cross country in the car. I know what my destination is supposed to be. I'm going to drive it. It needs to be driven properly, but I'm definitely not this car. but you can't enter that domain of like, so I'm not going to get an oil change. I'm not going to rotate my tires. If I get a flat, I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to try and fill up on gas. I'm just going to put the minimum gas necessary to get me from Florida to California. Well, what's going to happen? I'm going to destroy my car. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to have to get another car. So analogously,
Yeah.
I might know what the destination is. I might have the map to get there. I might have all the right reasons to get there. I know that I'm not the car, but if I don't take care of the car, and that includes the mind for us, right?
Yeah.
The body includes the mind-body complex, and they're more intertwined, as we know now, than we've ever understood it to be, even though ancient sciences always knew they were intertwined. We'll have to take a new car. We have to take a new birth to complete the mission, right? If we're not taking care of the vessel that's supposed to get us from A to B. So I
Sure.
think that we are not this body doesn't mean we're not responsible for this body. We are not the mind doesn't mean we're not responsible for the mind. So what's responsible care? And I think that that's kind of what this devotee who wrote these questions is kind of alluding to, which is, as a spiritualist, how are you responsible for the care of your mind? Especially because we're living in community. Maybe if I was just a yogi living in the Himalayas and I was in a cave and the way that I behaved or who I was or how I interacted with people didn't affect anybody, that's one way to do it, but that's not even our path. That's not even our prescribed methods. We're supposed to be interacting with people. So perhaps in my surrender, I could ostensibly, and I would argue this, but I would ostensibly be able to stay in my bubble of spiritual practice and be in that state of surrender such that it maybe didn't disturb my spiritual practice. I wonder. There's an asterisk on that for me, but I'm affecting other people.
Right.
My practice is affecting other people. And so if my behavior, or the way that I act, or the way that I show up in the world, because of samskaras, because of trauma, whatever, is impacting my relationships, then am I harming or hindering or slowing down the process of other people being able to share in this spiritual practice, because hurt people. So just because I maybe have a way of coping with the way that I've been hurt, it doesn't mean that I'm not transmitting that also.
Sure.
In addition to maybe also transmitting spiritual wisdom, which I think could be massively confusing.
Yeah. I assume, and you two would know this better, but I assume there are people that struggle with their mental health their entire lives, even after seeking many different therapies. And that fact doesn't mean that their life can't be a very valuable and progressive and successful life, even, particularly if there is an element of understanding that's my mind and I'm me. And I'm observing that mind, and I have to carry that weight, just as a person with a physical malady would have. I'm going to limp for the rest of my life, and I'm going to deal with that. And I'm going to be moving slower than other people physically, but it doesn't mean that my life's a failure now. And similarly, someone may struggle with a certain a mental health issue, and even they've tried to address it in many ways, they still struggle with it. It doesn't mean that my life hasn't been a success. I think from a purely materialistic point of view, it might feel that way because I never was able to shake this thing that's affecting my happiness. But for a devotee that's like really trying to cultivate a deeper spiritual realization, not only can life not be, one may not say that this life wasn't, one could say that one could achieve the very goal of life, even struggling with that burden. But I wanted, when this topic came up, I immediately thought of one verse that I wanted to share with the two of you, and I thought there might have been a clue in this verse. There might have been a clue for us here, and this is from the fourth canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 30, text 35. This is the Prachetas, these 10 great young yogis who went out and who were preparing themselves to become like political leaders, rulers in a sense, but they're preparing themselves through meditation. And then eventually they had a vision of Lord Vishnu, and they began to say these prayers. And they were granted, they were offered any benediction they want. This is a common theme in Bhagavatam, where the devotee, after prolonged meditation or service, has audience with Lord Vishnu, and they're offered whatever benediction. What would you like? I'll give it to you. And Bhagavatam consistently, they respond by not asking for anything material, but a very purely selfless devotional request. And the request of the Prachetas was, all we want is to always be in the association of your devotees, Lord Vishnu. That's our only desire. So they say in this text, 4:30-35, whenever pure topics of the transcendental world are discussed, the members of the audience forget all kinds of material hankerings, at least for the time being. Not only that, but they are no longer envious of one another, nor do they suffer from anxiety or fear. Okay, so right there, it seems to be an indication that, hey, you just need to absorb yourself in reading Bhagavatam and discussing it and hearing these pastimes and so on, and they will relieve you of all anxiety and fear. Your mental health disorder will be solved purely by that. But as I looked at, I wanted to look more carefully at this, because there is that kind of caveat here that's mentioned. And it says, at least for the time being, right? Whenever pure topics of the transcendental world are discussed, the members of the audience forget all kinds of material hankerings, at least for the time being. Not only that, but they are no longer envious of one another, nor do they suffer from anxiety and fear. And I looked at the Sanskrit, and that, at least for the time being, that's not there in the Sanskrit. Like, Prabhupada inserted that in there, right? Which I thought was very interesting, you know. And I looked at Jiva Goswami's commentary on this verse, and he says the highest sadhana and sadhya of all have been shown. So he's saying the highest practice and the highest goal of that practice have been shown here. In other words, bhakti practiced at its perfection and the achievement of the goal is being highlighted in these verses. He says that is shown in 3 verses, the 3 verses preceding this verse. All hankerings cease since the topics produce the highest attainment, and thus one is without enemies, those enemies being anxiety, fear, etc. So it seems that Prabhupada, he included this little phrase, at least for the time being. We come together, we practice bhakti together, we do kirtan together, we read Bhagavatam together, and we feel a freedom from anxiety, a feeling of freedom from fear, a freedom from mental anguish, perhaps. But it's transient. You know, that feeling we may experience it profoundly as practicing devotees. And then we may wake up the next morning and be right in the same exact place of mental struggle where we were before. So in the practice, that's the case, that we taste something, we get some relief, but it's only in the perfection. It's only once the goal has been achieved, that the highest attainment has been achieved necessarily, that we might entirely conquer all the enemies or all the types of suffering that we have. And so there's a prescription for relief from all suffering, and that's bhakti. It will relieve you of all mental suffering and all that. When you've completed the practice, you'll be entirely free. And you might even feel that for some time as you practice. But until you achieve that goal, the issues may continue to be present. And then the question becomes, what are the obstacles in the practice? And those obstacles may have to do with our mental health. Like, in other words, if my mental health issues prevent me from practicing bhakti with full absorption, then let me deal with that mental health issue in whatever way is most effective. And that's not a lack of faith. That is an act of faith, right? It's like, I have so much faith that absorbing myself in the practices of bhakti are the solution, that I'm determined to remove whatever obstacle it stands in the way of that. And if it's a mental health issue, then I'll deal with it. Then I'll approach whatever solution I can so that I can practice this more deeply. Is that in your own? I know Danya. I'm pretty certain that often your clients are practicing bhakti yogis, that they seek your help, and I'm not sure if that's so much the case with Kula Prabhu or if but certainly they're spiritual practitioners often of different ways. Is that, would that model kind of make sense in your own experience? Why don't we start with Kula?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was something I had been thinking about in our, as we were talking, that in our, and also as well, even me, there are, in our practice, this is like the continuing, this is the thing of our lifetime to practice and
Yeah.
to develop bhakti. And there will be aspects of, anxiety or depression that come. And I think sometimes when people come to see me, they are dealing with, they are usually coming to me because they're coming from a religious tradition and they want to speak to someone who understands some of these things that which they're dealing with, and to speak with it within a religious context. Because I think they want to, and me also, if I want to speak with somebody, to not really just veer off of this track that we're on. That we want to keep in mind that we're on this path of bhakti, or this path of devotion, and I am feeling this disconnectedness, or I'm feeling hurt from something, and I'm feeling grief from something, and I want to know it. I want to understand it from a context that I can continue on my path. And in some cases where the path can be hurtful, then that's also a discussion to have with people. But it requires, that space for a person to speak, to address those issues with community.
Sure. Thank you. Danya, in your own seva, in your own service in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I work about maybe 50-50 with people who are practicing bhakti yogis, and then other people who maybe don't identify that way, but certainly have some sort of spiritual principles guiding their life, let's say. And I do find that to not address that spiritual element means to kind of take the whole thing out of context, especially for these people. Because there's the why, like, why am I getting better? Why does depression happen in the first place? Why am I struggling with anxiety? And I think that, when you read like Prabhupada's purports and that kind of thing, he's getting to the root of the root of the root, because he has no time to waste. He's trying to give you what no one else can give you. Someone else in the field might be able to give you, well, it's because you experience this trauma, or because you have this chemical imbalance, or because, whatever, but he's giving you something no one else can give you. And it gives the ultimate context. And I think that is super valuable, because there's they call them like little t traumas, like the traumas that happen in day-to-day life that is sort of unavoidable and kind of like irk us and grate us, and we all kind of respond differently to them. And then there's big T traumas, which are like the big, the kind of samskaras that are not organized and intentional. They just happen naturally, deaths, separations, tragedies, natural disasters, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And there's a limit to the comfort and care that someone can receive if you don't address that spiritual element when those big T traumas come along, right? The big questions, the big why is this happening? Who can I reach to for help? Why, all of those things. I think that that's what gets addressed. And so I think that, when you're saying, yeah, you can be doing these practices and for a second have like a glimpse at the relief that you could feel if you were fully surrendered kind of permanently, right? If you were always in that state, you
Yeah.
could feel some of this. But I think that the contrast to that is when the rug is kind of pulled out from under you and there's nothing, also you feel that. Also you feel that there's like the positive experience of spirituality, and also the negative in the sense that something has been withdrawn. Now material life is not able to provide for you. Now there are no material answers for why this suffering is taking place. And so that spiritual thing needs to be there too. I think that there's like a healthy acknowledgement of the limitations of material resources also that can be a part of the conversation. And so I think that it has to be both. I think you need to be able to contact spiritual practices that give you the relief and the experience of what this could be, permanently, and then
Sure.
also the experience of kind of feeling like, okay, these tools and these resources, they help, but where am I channeling them to? What's the ultimate goal? Because this alone is not going to be able to sustain me. And I think that, kind of like what Kula was saying, that interdisciplinary team of people who have different angles on this allow it actually acknowledges the complexity of our human experience. We don't just
Sure.
have a mental health thing that needs to be addressed in a mental health way and spiritual needs that need to be addressed in a spiritual way. It's all kind of wrapped up together. And I actually found a quote um, from one of Prabhupada's purports in the Bhagavatam, because this devotee was also asking, like, what does Prabhupada say about this? And I think
Yeah.
Prabhupada says a lot of things that all kind of resonate with this one quote that I found. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.22. This is in the purport. He says, when advancement of knowledge is applied in the service of the Lord, the whole process becomes absolute. The personality of Godhead and his transcendental name, fame, glory, etc., are all non-different from him. Therefore, all the sages and devotees of the Lord have recommended that the subject matter of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, and all other branches of knowledge should be wholly and solely applied in the service of the Lord.
Very interesting. Very, yeah. So that kind of, to me, that perfectly ties in what I was saying. In other words, if my life isn't, if my faith is such that I've come to the conclusion that my very purpose is to uncover my love of Krishna, and everything I do, whether it be my occupation, my role in my family, my role in my society, all of these things, I see in relation to that primary goal in my life. Then my entire life, that's a manifestation of complete faith, right? Like full surrender. And so here it's very interesting that Prabhupada used that okay, if I'm approaching a psychological therapy, a modern form of psychological therapy, if I'm doing it aligned with that purpose, why am I seeking this therapy? Because there's an obstacle that's preventing my full service, my full absorption, my full meditation. That's psychological. So the reason I'm seeking that is not because I've lost faith in the practice, is because I have so much faith in the practice that I want to do all that I can to be able to practice it better. And Prabhupada right there, in a sense, is validating that with that statement.
Mm.
That was a very interesting one. A lot of the it seems to me maybe the essence behind this question has to do with, are we prone as devotees to reach out to questionable practices or questionable ideas to solve problems that there are clear-cut solutions to that we're consciously or unconsciously avoiding? And it occurs to me that the materialist looks at the solutions of the tradition, the person of tradition, as naive. And like when we read Chaitanya Bhagavat, and they're looking at Sri Chaitanya, and he's in his devotional ecstasies, those devotional ecstasies appear to others as a mental health disorder, right? Like he's rolling, he's actually convulsing and so on, in his extreme devotional ecstasies. And people are coming up with all kind of solutions. Oh, he's haunted by a ghost. He needs an exorcist. Oh, he's got an imbalance of the prana, in his body. You need to, the solution to this is rubbing oil, on his body. He needs a daily abhyanga, and so they look at those things as naive. Although there a lot can be said for those things, a lot can be said for those. And the traditionalist looks at the modern things as misdirected and potentially destructive, and it's a fact that so much of the people are being drugged like crazy nowadays, and there's all kind of side effects, and there's all kinds of problems that develop through that. And at the same time, there's a lot of people are being helped, and finding solutions through modern methods. So it occurs that that on both ends there's quackery. On both ends there's both ends can fall short in their application, and at the same time, both also do provide practical answers. So I kind of like your idea, and it's something that you both embody so well. You're two people that I've known for many years that are very serious about your practice of bhakti, and very engaged in it, and at the same time, bouncing that, or entering your field, your modern field with that, and providing. You used the term, Danya. I forget what it was, but kind of a co. Can you remember what I was? I'm sorry. I went to unmute you, and I
unmuted myself. Complimentary, is that what it is?
Complimentary. Yeah, that perhaps that's a wise approach, is that we can, I suppose, as practitioners of these fields of therapy that you both operate in, that you find there's a range of people, and that there's a range of how these techniques should be applied. Some people need more of this, and some people maybe need more of that, or less of this or less of that. But it does seem like it's a healthy idea to say that these can work together for the one, and as for the devotees, for the bhakti yogis, for those with this faith, that combined. I'm sorry, again, what was the term you used?
Complementary.
Complementary. Thank you. These complementary. That these complementary. That these processes can be seen as complementary, right, and always within the context of with that one goal of the devotee, that one faithful goal of the devotee, that whatever I do, that my body, my words, my mind, that they all be offered entirely to God. That's my goal. That's my purpose, and that's my purpose in seeking these kind of therapies. I thank you both so much. We've run out of time. It's such a big topic, but I think I'm hopeful that we got to the essence of it. I'm hopeful that Bhaktivatsala and the other members of his sage group have found this conversation to be helpful. I know I have. I thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Look forward to bringing you back sometime soon. Okay, Maraji, how are you doing over there?
Good. Moving away.
So as we said, there is no show tomorrow, correct?
Right, and we'll be back on Tuesday at 7 a.m.
with
Chaitanya Charan, the spiritual scientist.
The spiritual scientist. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. And here's that Mayapuri music, Danya. Danya, do you appear on this recording?
I do. I'm one of the background singers.
Excellent. It's really such a masterpiece.
Danya also just released a new song too.
Did you? What's that called?
It's called Sorry.
Sorry? Like the one that you wear, or the one that you feel?
No, not like that. Sorry, like the feeling you have.
Okay. Wonderful. And where can people find that recording?
They can find it Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, anywhere where you stream music. It should be there.
Did they just put Danya, D-H, did they just spell your name? D-H-A. And Sorry, S-O-R-R-Y. Okay, I'll check that out.
I can also link it in the show notes for this episode as well.
Oh, great. When you were all recording this, did you all realize that you were creating such a masterpiece?
I think they did.
There was an energy in there, right?
It's just anything. Gaura's so enthusiastic. Gaura produces this, along with the guys, and you could actually feel it. And I think, I don't know, cool, if it has to be part of the experience that Jahnavi has in the studio too, where you tap into something, you feel like you've been carried by a current of something bigger. And all of us that were witnessing these guys in this process with Gaura and Mayapuri, like, we definitely knew something special was happening when they were making this. I don't know if we knew how special, but it was definitely in the air. It was done from a really special place in their heart. So
at every step of this song, at every change and so on, it's just like, whoa.
Totally. And then when it transitions into the next song where it goes slow and then Achyuta comes in and Gaura comes in, it's the best.
Yeah. Okay, well, you were there and you were part of it.
Yeah, I got to witness that for sure.
Thank Bali, your husband, again for us
I
for creating this. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you all so much. Everybody, as Raghunath would say, it's a beautiful day for a beautiful day. Let the magic flow and continue to flow.